the children of Carol Cummings and Lance Tichneor, grandmother. It is an honor to be here today and to celebrate the life and to mourn the loss of our grandmother. The chance to do this with the community that she built is one of the many gifts she has left us. Even the terrible sorrow that is here today and all of its cruelty is also a gift. That we are mourning so deeply means that we have had the privilege of knowing and loving Virginia. As I stand here, I feel the grief, but I can also feel and see all of the love that exists in this room. Love between siblings, between wives and husbands, children, cousins, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and friends. Each of these relationships and all of the love we share, and even much of the life that is present today, exists because of Virginia. She has given us this community. It is a gift that lives on, and through this gift, we can recount so many others. We would like to take this time now to share some of the gifts our grandmother has given to us.
A couple of months ago in my English class, we were asked to write a speech about a picture. I chose a picture of my grandmother's childhood home. It actually should be on your program. It showed a small dusty shack surrounded by broken barrels and dry dirt. I then described some of the struggles and triumphs in her life. At the end, I looked up to see my teacher crying. This didn't surprise me that she should have this reaction, because of course my teacher should cry. My grandmother was one of the most amazing people I know. Her experiences throughout her entire life have shown me that if she can come from that and accomplish what she has, then I can do anything that I want in my life.
I'm Eric, the first son, the only son of Carol, competing with Kevin here and a couple others for coolest grandson too. It's neck and neck, but we'll see how it goes after the speech. So I've got three memories that revolve around a 24-hour period that I'd like to share with you. I must have been around 8 years old. It was the first time my parents sent me alone without Duffy to stay at the grandparents' house, and I wasn't feeling it too much. I was kind of nervous, but we started the evening off watching Wheel of Fortune and Jeopardy, much like Granddad would always do. That lasted for a while until grandmother realized that I couldn't name a single thing on Jeopardy. So she instructed Granddad to go out and get the model airplanes. That was just the coolest thing of all time. I remember I was going to bring some too, but yeah, that didn't happen. And I just remember I was sprinting down the hallways with the airplanes. I was the machine gunner. Granddad was sitting on the couch. He was my tail gunner, drinking his coffee, eating whatever. And that right there was the most realistic thing that I've ever experienced right there. And why I bring that up is because this story is important to me, because it really shows the effort poured forth by both grandparents to ensure that my imagination was able to run free. And imagination is the one thing that nobody can take from you, and that's what she taught me.
First impressions matter. I remember one afternoon at my grandmother's house during my high school freshman year. Grandmother and I were sitting down for a visit, and she was asking me questions about school. I had just finished telling her about a book I was enjoying in my language arts class when she stopped me and said, "Gina Duff, you are a talented and very capable young woman. However, when you say you know and like, people are not going to think you are very smart. First impressions matter, so you need to use your vocabulary." My first response was, ouch. And second was, you're right. She was the master at putting a loving twist on brutal honesty. I like to call it the grandmother backhand.
True love. My grandmother demonstrated true love to me. She demonstrated it with her children and with my granddad. She had him completely head over heels, according to the stories that my mother tells me. My granddad once told his children that if they were on a sinking ship, he would throw them all overboard if that's what it took to save Virginia. It's kind of harsh, but my grandmother told me, that my mother told me It didn't scare her because she always knew that her mother would never let that happen. She would always protect them no matter what.
I'd like to think that my dad could save us all, but realistically speaking, he'd probably go for long. So later that night, after a couple hours of cruising down and fighting the Germans and the Japanese, I was doing that, by the way. We went to, or I was put to bed in the guest bed, and I couldn't sleep. It was tough. I wasn't at home with my mom. I was in a foreign bed. Granddad and Grandma were in their bed, and I was instructed by her to come and get her if I needed. So I did. I went up and I curled right up in their bed. For some reason, I still couldn't fall asleep because there was a jackhammer of a noise going right next to me. It turned out that it was just Granddad snoring. The guy it was unreal how loud it was. And she noticed that I was still restless, and so she took me into the guest bed again, except for this time, she stayed there with me the whole night. And that was just awesome, because I know that she was tired. I know that she needed sleep. She was grumpy. Why does she need to be hanging around this 8-year-old snot-nosed kid like me, sleeping in the same little guest bed? But if that's what it took to make sure that I had an enjoyable stay, then she'd be willing to do it.
Listen to everybody's story. Thanksgiving is my favorite holiday. A typical Cummings Thanksgiving party is one big ruckus full of jests, questions, laughter, and much debate. Every year, Grandmother would arrive at our home, always a little bit early, and settle herself into a chair. By the end of the day, she would have had a conversation with everyone who had walked through the door. It was at Thanksgiving about 4 years ago when I had brought my boyfriend, Ethan, to the party. He, like everyone else, was not immune to my grandmother's allure. Within a couple of hours, he was sitting across the table from her, wrapped up in conversation. I really liked this guy, so it was critical that he received the grandmother's stamp of approval. Some while later, the conversation ended, and I found Ethan to ask how it went. He looked at me with astonishment and wide eyes and said, "Duff, I just had an hour-and-a-half conversation with your grandmother, and I'm pretty sure she knows more about my aspirations, faults, family history, education, and general life trajectory than anyone else in the world." "Yeah, she's pretty incredible," I said. "Not only that," said Ethan, "apparently your grandmother is also a source on urban planning and sustainable design."
My grandmother displayed total interest in what was happening in my life. Even when I was way too big to sit on her lap, she would pull me over and sit me down. When we talked, I felt like I was the most important person in the world. She expressed her opinions on books that she read and always wanted to know what I had been reading. I always knew that she loved me completely, just like she did all of her children and great-grandchildren, even though she was a little disappointed that none of us had red hair. Sorry, Grandmother.
Yeah, I almost forgot about the chair sitting down situation. I'm 6'3", and she was still begging me to sit on her lap. I was just, I'm just gonna pull a chair up here and we can Yeah, she was, the ultimate lap chair. So anyways, moving on to the third and final part of my story. The next morning, while Grandmother cooked scrambled eggs, more on that in half a second. She cooks scrambled eggs, and Granddad and I sat at the dining table and looked at these birds that were flying out their window, a huge window, right to the bird feeder, and they were chickadees. We sat there for, I don't know, it was probably 15 minutes, but it seemed like 4 hours to me, and we were pointing out all the different birds, naming them, and we got one of them, Eric Bird, just happened to be the biggest, strongest, no, it's not a coincidence or anything, but yeah, so we named Eric Bird, and that was, that's a memory that I'll have for the rest of my life. I'll remember that bird and what it meant to me. So, we named one of them Eric Bird, and so anyways, once Grandmother finally forced me to remove my hat and wash my hands, 8-year-old, She then served up some scrambled eggs, toast, and orange juice. I have, to this day, been trying to figure out what special ingredient she used in her scrambled eggs. Amazing. Unless there's like a secret society of grandparents and they have this like recipe that they're not telling. I'll figure it out someday, but eggs aren't supposed to taste that good. And so, pretty much, my parents came and picked me up, and I just was shocked that it had gone by so quick, and I was able to have that much fun with old people. It was awesome. It was one of my favorite experiences I've had. That's why I can remember it, 12, 14 years later. So pretty much, what did grandmother teach me? And in short, she taught me how to be a gentleman.
And to conclude with the gifts that she shared with us, trust your heart in love. In the fall of 2011, I returned from a 7-week backpacking trip to a loving family and supportive boyfriend. I felt very accomplished for having completed a life-term goal, but I was restless. I was approaching the phase in my relationship where we had to decide if we were going to progress into marriage or part ways. I mentioned this to my grandmother one day and asked for her advice. "Grandmother," I said, "how do you know that you and Granddaddy were right for each other?" She snickered. "I don't know that we were right for each other at all," she said. But none of that mattered. I knew that despite what anybody said, no matter what they thought, and no matter how valid the objections, Granddaddy and I loved each other. Wild horses could not have kept us apart. I knew the feeling she was describing, and apparently so did my boyfriend, because 9 months later, I married my sweetheart.
I wrote